Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today's video is my June reading wrap up. So we're going to talk about the books that I read in the month of June. It was an extremely busy month, and this is by far the least amount I have read in a month in quite some time. To be fair, I'm working full time. I am parenting. It was the end of the school year, and I had a ton of events. So many events, really fun, exciting events, book events, pride events, different things. It was incredibly busy and I did not read nearly as much as I have in the past, but I still have a solid stack of books to talk about, so we're going to get into it. If you haven't seen one of my new wrap-up formats yet, the way I do this is I start by talking about my reading stats for the month. I do enjoy this as a stats nerd, so I'm going to get into a little bit of my stats, what I was reading, genres, etc. And then I will get into the books that I read, divided into hits, surprises, and faves. If you are not interested in the reading stats part, you are more than welcome to skip forward to the part where I start actually reviewing the books. With that said, let's go ahead and dive in. In the month of June, I read 13 books. I will say there were a few others that I had in progress that I was close to finishing by the end of the month, but I just was not able to make it happen before the month ended. So it is lower. This is a total of 5,265 pages, or an average of 175 pages per day. Of those 13 books, 9 of them were ARCs, or advanced reader copies, that I had for review. 2 of them were rereads. This month I did not read any graphic novels or manga. I had 1 book that was indie published or small press, and I did not read any translated works this month. In terms of format, this was almost entirely audio. I was reading physically and digitally, but again, those are the books that I did not finish by the end of the month, and you're going to hear about those in my July wrap up. So this month I read 1 physical book, and it's a picture book. So that I finished. We're going to talk about that. And I listened to 12 audiobooks. That was the month that I had, y'all. I also will say I'm reading things for work, but it's not books that are out yet that I can talk about. It's books that we're considering acquiring at the publisher that I'm working at as an intern. So there is more reading that I'm doing, but it's not really counting here, which is fine. I kind of knew this might happen. Taking a closer look at those audiobooks, 7 of them are what I call shelf, which means I had a physical copy on my TBR and I got it off my TBR through audio, or primarily through audio. In some cases, these were blended reads where I listened to part of it on audio and read part of it physically. And in terms of where those audiobooks were coming from this month, 1 of them was from Audible, 6 of them were audio review copies from NetGalley, 3 of them were from my library, and 2 of them were from Libra FM, including some audio influencer copies, which they make some available to me every month in exchange for talking about them. Y'all know my spiel. I love Libra FM. I think they're phenomenal. And if you want an alternative to Audible that supports local indie bookstores, I think they are fantastic. I do get some free audiobooks from them, but I also do a paid subscription with them where I get a credit every month. There's a link down below if you want to go check them out. In terms of age demographics, it was mostly adult books. 11 of the books that I read were targeted at an adult audience. I also read 1 YA book and 1 children's book. I did not read any middle grade this month. In terms of publication date, it's mostly frontlist. Shocker. The earliest published book that I read this month was from 2020. I read 3 books that were backlist, published prior to 2024. I read 1 2024 release and I read 9 2025 releases. As you may know, I really value reading diversely. It's something I prioritize. And so every month I check in on how that's going. My benchmarks are that I'm aiming to read around 50% from Black, Indigenous, or person of color authors, and at least 25% from openly queer authors. But given the fact that it was June and Pride Month, I was reading even more queer books. I mean, I always read a lot of them, but these are authors who are openly part of the LGBTQ+ community. This month, 53.8%. Oh wow, it's the same. That's funny. 53.8% of the books that I read were by openly queer authors, and 53.8% of the books that I read were by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors. So we did great. Next up, let's take a look at genre. I was reading predominantly in my favorite genres. 6 of the books that I read were fantasy. 3 of them were romances, including 1 historical romance, 1 contemporary romance, and 1 speculative romance. A speculative romance is going to be your sci-fi, fantasy, or paranormal romance. I also read 2 horror novels, 1 general nonfiction, and 1 thriller. Lastly, we're going to take a look at the Read What You Own challenge. I will tell you, this was the worst month for my TBR because I had so many events and I got So many incredible books for free, a ton sent from publishers, a ton at events. I went to the Threads Pride Book Fair and came back with so many queer books, like amazing, amazing stuff that I'm happy to have in my TBR. But did it like decimate all of my progress for the entire year and then some? Yes, so let's look at these numbers. In terms of audio, my audio TBR is currently at 250, which is up 19 from the beginning of the year. I'm less concerned about audio and ebooks because they are digital. They're not taking up actual space on my shelves. My Kindle TBR was 64 by the end of the month, which is the same as it was at the start of the year. My physical TBR, however, was 470 books, which is up 17 since the beginning of the year. I need people to stop sending me books for a few months and let me like get through some of them. What I may need to do is do sort of like a taste test type thing, maybe with some of my patrons. We'll see, just to get a sense of like, are all of these books that are my vibe? Because some books are for me, some are not, and that's okay. But yeah, my TBR, y'all, it's a lot, but there are a lot of really good ones I'm excited to read. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into the books that I read in the month of June. I am actually going to talk about all the books that I read this month. I feel like even the couple that were not necessarily favorites for me, I didn't dislike, and I think I have some useful things to say. So we're going to include everything. It is all divided up into hits, surprises, and faves. Let's start with my hits. First up, we're going to talk about my 2 rereads. Both of them are in the hits category. I knew they were going to be in the hits category because I have read them before. So for my Patreon and channel member book club, this month for Pride Month, we read a queer book by a Black author, and the book that was chosen was An Island Princess Starts a Scandal by Adriana Herrera. This is a sapphic historical romance with an Afro-Latina main character, and I actually would say I enjoyed it even more the second time around than I did the first time. And book club was really interesting. We had a lot of good things to say about it. A lot of people enjoyed it. It is not my favorite book in the series, I must admit, but I still had a really good time, and I feel like the second time I read it, I caught a lot more of the nuances of the relationship between the characters, one of whom is an artist who is going to do a marriage of convenience for her family, and the buttoned up older woman who falls for her very quickly. So yeah, this was a good time. Did a reread of that. I do recommend the entire series, honestly. They're all bangers. And then for the Mass Effect read-along, I did a reread of House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series, and it is actually the only book of hers that I had already read twice before the read-along, and so this was my 3rd time reading it, and I still love it. It was it was great. I think, now I say this having not reread the second 2 books in the series, but I think this is my favorite book in the series. Currently, I would say this is my favorite book in the series. And I think what's interesting about it that's different from any of her other books that I wasn't expecting the first time around, but makes it really rereadable, is it is a mystery book. Ultimately, the plot engine is a murder mystery, and it's kind of this mix of urban paranormal fantasy with a murder mystery plot, plus Sarah J. Maas's brand of the way she does writing, the way she does characters, the way she does quiet moments in between things. Anyway, we had a great live show with this, with me and Alexa from Alexa Loves Books, talking at length about all of it. So if you're interested, I will link that video up above. But yeah, we are nearing the end, y'all. We only have 3 books left. I have to tell you, when I decided to do this reread project over a year ago, like about a year and a half ago now, I don't think I realized how different my life would be by the time that we neared the end of it. Would I commit to something quite as long again? I don't know, maybe not, but it has been a pretty good time, and I'm excited to do like a final wrap up talking about the things that I've come away with having done this project. So those are my 2 rereads that were hits initially and continue to be hits. Another hit was The Enchanted Greenhouse by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a companion novel to The Spell Shop, which was one of my favorite books of last year, and this one was really good as well. It is a cozy fantasy romance, and you might know if you read The Spell Shop that the heroine in that book has a sentient spider plant companion, and in this book, we're following the sorceress who illegally created Kaz, the spider plant, and was turned into a statue. And then she suddenly awakens in this greenhouse and doesn't know where she is or what's going on. And she's, through various things, been brought to this mostly abandoned series of magical greenhouses to hopefully fix them. But she's like, I don't know if I can do that. It is very cute. It's a grumpy sunshine romance. The one person still on this island is this very gruff, grumpy gardener. And she is a, you know, like middle-aged, plus-size heroine. And they find love while also meeting more sentient plants and saving the greenhouse. And it's delightful. I had a lovely time reading it. I highly recommend it. It was great. If you liked The Spell Shop, I don't think you will be disappointed with the sequel. 2 more hits to talk about. First up is The Mercy Makers by Tessa Gratton. I thought I would love this because I really like Tessa Gratton's writing, and I was not wrong. Here's the thing to know about it. This book is being pitched as romantic epic fantasy, which I think it is, but I do think that if it's hitting the romantasy crowd, they might not be expecting that it is epic political fantasy, because the world building and the fantasy elements are more intense in this than what you would expect in your typical romantasy book. And so I do think there are some readers who are like, oh, this is too dense, this is too boring. But like, it's because it's a more serious fantasy, even if it does have more steamy romantic elements to it. I loved it. It's queer, it's got sapphic characters. It's set in a world with a really interesting magic system that intersects with the politics and religion of the city-state that it's set in. The main character that we're following is the daughter of a crime lord who does a kind of magic on the body that can change bodies that is considered heretical, and she does this in secret. But then her father is captured and executed, and the princess of the city forcibly takes her as a handmaiden, and she ends up involved in messy court politics, uncovering secrets. It is the first book in a trilogy, and I loved it. The heroine is bisexual, and it is very steamy. Maybe not in terms of quantity of scenes, but degree of steam is high, I would say, in the scenes that there are in here, with men and women of various sorts. And it was great. I loved it. I liked the politics. I liked the religious elements that were woven into it. It was fantastic, and I'm very excited to read the second book. I had a copy from Orbit, so thank you so much to them for sending me a copy. It was really good. My final hit is a picture book that I read to my kids, and this was a book that I got at the Threads Pride Book Fair, and this is called One Day in June by Tourmaline, illustrated by Charlotte Christensen, about the life of Marsha P. Johnson, who was a Black trans woman involved in activism, involved in what happened at Stonewall, and in starting the original Pride protests that eventually led to a lot of the changes that we saw in the treatment of the queer community and legislative changes over the years. She was a pivotal figure in all of this. Tourmaline recently wrote a adult nonfiction biography of her, and I have not read it, but I've heard it's really good. I'm interested in reading it. This is targeted at young kids. And I will say this, when I went and did a Goodreads review, there was a review from someone who was like critical that it was, you know, like pretty happy mostly. It like hints that there were some difficult things she went through, but like this is written for young children. So I'm like, if you want like the nitty gritty details, read the adult nonfiction book, right? Like this is written for like 5-year-olds. My kids are 8 and 11, and I feel like this was good as a jumping off point for then me adding to it with things that I know about Marsha and what her life meant and the history of Stonewall. But I think as it is, it's really something that's a good starting point for much younger kids. My kids actually asked, one of my kids asked like, hey, is there a book about her that's one of those like, is this person who is this person? And I was like, I don't think there is, but maybe there will be, maybe there should be. I think that would be interesting. So I think if you have older kids, this is not really going to give them enough information, but you can use it as a jumping off point for talking about queer history, which I think is great to do. But it's lovely, beautifully illustrated about Marsha. And it is a little strange because there are bits where it jumps to protests during COVID unexpectedly, but it's really lovely. And it's written for young kids, so I liked it. It was a hit. If you're looking for something like that, I would recommend it. Next, we're going to talk about my surprises. Generally, this is books that were not quite what I expected in some way. So I feel like this is a good category for books that I was like, oh, that was not what I thought that book was going to be. Or, oh, that was not what I thought what this book was going to be. You know, first up, I read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams for my work book club. I had heard about this book. I had not read anything from Tia Williams before. I think the writing is really good. It's very immersive and readable. You feel like you know the characters, you care about the characters. I wanted to keep reading it. And it's following two people who have a history together, right? They were briefly in a relationship with each other as teenagers when they were both going through very traumatic, painful things and coping with it through like drugs and alcohol and self-harm. So it is not a light novel. In the current day, there are both authors, but they haven't spoken since the summer that some things went down. He is this celebrated literary author who has more recently gotten sober and feels like he can't write anymore since he got sober. She is a single mom dealing with serious chronic pain that she's had since childhood, and it's continued to be a thing. And she writes kind of a smutty paranormal romance series, and they reconnect. Her daughter is hilarious and a great character. I think the way that she builds these characters is incredible and is really riveting. I loved her writing. I would read more from her in the future. I will say one thing about it is I don't know that I'm entirely sold on their romance as a happily ever after in the current day, based on the sorts of situations they were in when they first fell for each other as teenagers. For me, I don't know that we see enough for it to make sense to me for them to necessarily get back together long term in that way. But I think this does a really good job of doing this kind of chronic pain disability representation. I think it does a really good job of looking at the process of healing from trauma and the impact that it can have long term. The writing itself is really good. So it was a surprise. I wasn't sure quite what to expect. A little bit of a mixed bag as a romance, but overall really good, and I can see why so many people have loved it. My next surprise is a book that I read for a secret project I've been working on that you will be seeing very soon because I just finished the final book for that video project. So this book is Cuckoo by Gretchen Felker Martin. It is like Camp Damascus's much darker older sister. If you've read Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle, you know what I mean, right? This is a horror novel centering on teenagers who attend a gay conversion camp, except that what's running the camp might not be human. It is a lot. I'm going to talk about it more in the video that I'm specifically reading this for, but all the content warnings. It is a little bit relentless. I get what it's doing, and I think what made it work for me is that later in the book we get a time jump, and without giving too much away, we're following the perspectives of a bunch of different characters, trans characters, queer characters, as teenagers experience really horrific abuse and violence and other scary horror things at this camp. And then we see the way that trauma in youth carries over and impacts you as an adult later on. It's rough, but also I get why she's doing it. It surprised me in that I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be so intense. I have read more intense horror that does get very graphic in descriptions of things like abuse, sexual assault, plus like, you know, your normal gruesome, gory things and violence, and there is so much of that, and also transphobia and homophobia and all of those things. But it also in some ways feels like an important book where, okay, there's part of this that's fantastical, but it's also based on traumatic things that have happened to real queer teenagers over the years, right? And that have impacted them as adults. So not a book that I would recommend widely. I don't think everybody could pick this up and be okay reading it, but if it's something you can deal with, I do think it's good and it is worth your time. Will you necessarily enjoy it? Maybe not. But sometimes there are books where I'm like, I didn't necessarily enjoy the process of reading the majority of that, but I came away from it thinking about things deeply, and I see what it's doing and I see value in it, and that's kind of how I feel about Cuckoo. So that was an interesting one. Another surprise was Flight of the Fallen by Hannah Lee. This is the second book in a dystopian fantasy duology with polyamory, queer characters. First book really had like Mad Max Fury Road vibes and was very action-packed. I think what surprised me about this book is that the first like half of it, at least, was very slow and a very different vibe from the first one. We are, instead of being on the road with action in the desert, we're following the characters doing different things in the city, and those things do eventually have a payoff at the end of the book that is very satisfying. I do think the end of this is a very satisfying conclusion to the duology, and it does some real interesting things with genre and took some turns I was not expecting, but it surprised me because I was like, oh, this does not feel the same for the first big chunk of it. So just go in expecting that it's going to be a sort of a different vibe, but I do think it's a really satisfying conclusion. This is another one I had for review from Saga Press, so thank you to them for sending me a copy. Okay, my next surprise is a book that I was really excited about because the premise sounded amazing, and there are a lot of things about this book that I really like. The thing that surprised me, or that I maybe wasn't expecting, was the choice of like when to place this novel and when to end it. It's the start of a trilogy, and let's just talk about it. This is Birth of a Dynasty by Chinaza Bado. It is African-inspired fantasy with political intrigue elements and families warring for power. We're primarily following two perspectives of children from different families. One of them is the sole surviving heir who has had to go into hiding after the rest of his family was killed. He's a boy, he's pretending to be like a normal villager and working in a way that he didn't in his earlier childhood. And so we kind of follow his perspective. And then we also follow the youngest beloved daughter of a ruler who is always getting up to trouble, does not do what she's supposed to do, and is a delight. Honestly, I love her. She was my favorite character in the book, and I really enjoyed reading her perspective. But I don't want to spoil what happens, but we follow these two characters and their intersections with the larger politics, rebellions, fascist dictators, you know, like various things. And then there's also some magical elements at play. I really liked some of the characters. I really like the concept and some of the politics and the world building. The world is very cool. The thing that surprised me was that we start this book with both of these children being young children, and we also end this book with both of them being children. And also it ends in a place that does not really wrap up any kind of a satisfying plot arc. It feels like a lot of setup, if that makes sense. So not a bad book. I feel like it's doing some really interesting things, but like reading it as a standalone book outside of it being eventually a trilogy, the story arc and the place that we're ending the arc feels a little odd for adult political fantasy. That said, I'm curious to see what she does in book 2. This might be the kind of book that you may want to like hold on to and then read once you have more in the series, because I don't think that this book on its own is going to give you sort of a satisfying plot arc by itself, but it will introduce you to some really interesting characters, to a world. There is stuff that happens, you know, like it's not like nothing happens, but it doesn't like, you know, like normally you have like the climax and the denouement, and you don't like really totally get that here in the way that I was expecting. So it's interesting. I will say this is her first time writing fantasy. She writes contemporary and historical romance under J.J. McAvoy. I've read her historical romances and I love them, so I think there's something about her writing that is really good. The way she does characters and the way she slowly builds character development over time is excellent, but there were some things to this book that I wasn't quite expecting. 2 more surprises and then we will get into my faves. The next surprise for me this month was If We Survive This by Raquel Marie. This was pitched as like a YA zombie horror novel, and technically, yes, it is. Does it read like a horror novel? No, not really. It reads more like a surprisingly quiet, thoughtful, kind of like interior life queer coming of age story. We're following a queer young woman through split timelines. So we have her in the past, pre-zombie apocalypse, and her in the present day trying to survive the zombie apocalypse. And she is a young woman who deals with severe OCD and intrusive thoughts. So here's the content warning that I'm going to give for this. It is pretty viscerally descriptive of the experience of having OCD and intrusive thoughts. So if that's something that you feel would be difficult for you to read on the page, I would not necessarily recommend this to you, but I do think it's done well. It has a sapphic romantic subplot to it. That's not the main story, but it's there. And there are zombies and there are gross things with the zombies, but it doesn't read like a zombie novel. It's not action-packed. It's not fast-paced. It is more of a quiet, thoughtful, contemporary coming of age story with some zombies in the mix. So not what I was expecting. Not a bad book. I think it is a really well done version of what it is, but just go in with the right expectations. My final surprise this month is a book that I got for review from a small press, and I requested it because I was like, this sounds really interesting. I don't know if I'm gonna like it, but I just want to see what this is gonna be. And I ended up loving it, like spoiler, but it was a surprise for me because I did not know what to expect. This is The Adventures of Mary Darling by Pat Murphy. It is a historical fantasy novel that is mixing Peter Pan and Sherlock Holmes. And I was like, wait, it's doing what? How's this gonna go? It's so good. So it is following primarily the perspective of Mary Darling, the mother of the children taken by Peter Pan. And she is a very interesting woman with an interesting history who knows where her children are and is gonna go get them back and is not gonna let anything stop her. And Sherlock Holmes is also brought onto the case to find them, but he doesn't believe in fairies or magic or anything and doesn't take her seriously. It's a really, really well done book that is seamlessly mixing together magical elements with real world history of the treatment of women, the treatment of minorities during this time period when Peter Pan was set. And I loved it. I talk about it quite a bit in my Goodreads review. I do write reviews for all these. You can always follow me on Goodreads and see what I think. But I thought this was so well done. Mary Darling is an incredible character, and this kept me interested throughout the whole thing. And I went into it like, am I gonna DNF this? Am I gonna love? Like, how is this gonna go? And yeah, it was great. Highly recommend. So that was a surprise as well. Lastly, let's talk about my faves. This month, I did not give any books 6 stars, which in my personal rating scale is a favorite of the year. However, I did have 2 books that I really loved a lot that were among my 5-star reads that I decided to put in this category. First up is King of Ash by S.A. Cosby. Y'all, his books are so freaking good. His writing is incredible. There are not that many authors that write crime fiction like this that I will read regularly, but S.A. Cosby at this point, like anything he writes, I'll try. This read like a modern version of a Greek tragedy. It's so good. It's set in the American South, and it follows this Black man who has kind of disconnected from his family, and he is extremely successful working for celebrities, helping them with their financial planning, helping them get out of financial trouble, doing some shady things on the side with it maybe, but like very successful. And he gets called back to his hometown because his father was in a car accident and is in a coma. Now, his family owns the local crematorium. And when he gets there, he finds that his sister is kind of running the show. She's keeping everything together as the oldest sister, while also kind of hooking up with this not super great cop on the side. And his younger brother has gotten himself into some serious trouble and is probably going to get killed because he made some very bad choices and owes a shit ton of money to a local gang. Big brother is like, I'm going to save the day and fix this, but they only get in deeper. And it turns into a crime and family drama of epic proportions that is just so gripping and so well written. Like I said, if you've read Greek tragedies and you know how those feel, this feels like that. Amazing. Highly recommend. It's great. I had an audio review copy of that from NetGalley. And lastly, my final hit of the month. I am so happy to say that I have a signed copy of this book. I got to go and see the author on tour. This is Bury Your Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This is among my favorite books by V.E. Schwab, and I have read most of their books, not all of them. There's a few that I haven't read, but the majority of them. And I love this so much. It is toxic lesbian vampires, y'all. It's real good. It's got 3 main perspective characters and timelines. We have a woman who grew up in 1500s Spain. We have a woman from Victorian England, and we have a woman in the modern day in 2019, I think going to Harvard, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where she's at. It's great. They are morally complex characters. The way that things weave together is so gripping and poetic. It is not a romance, although there are romantic, sensual elements to it for sure. But this is a great vampire story, and all of the characters are really interesting, and the way that it all comes together, it's so good. So definitely among my favorites. Highly recommend. I loved it. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. I did not read as many as usual, but there were some really interesting books that I read, some surprising books, and some that I loved a whole lot. So I'm not mad about it. I am hoping July is a little bit better. So far my schedule is looking much calmer, so I should have more time to read more books, which would be great. But yeah, if you reach this point in the video, drop a vampire emoji in the comments down below. Or for your question of the day, tell me about a book that was not what you expected, that maybe you had certain genre expectations or pacing expectations, and it was a mismatch. Not necessarily bad, but like not what you were expecting. Let me know about that in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.